I'll see what happens. Follow you. It likes to be consistent. Yeah. Good afternoon and welcome to the August crop production and WASDE briefing. My name is Lance Honig and I serve as chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board at NASS. This briefing is for the Secretary of Agriculture and other policymakers at USDA to better understand the content and context of today's reports. We are very pleased to have USDA's Deputy Secretary Vaden joining us today. We also welcome Dr. Justin Benavidez, USDA's Chief Economist. I'd also like to share that we do have quite a few visitors joining us today. They are representing the Indiana Farm Bureau, Soybean Alliance, and Corn Marketing Council, Poet Grain, Senators Thune and Cruz's offices, and various USDA staff as well. So welcome to all of our visitors, both in the room and online today. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I do have a few notes for our live streaming audience. The crop production and WASDE reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports. The Office of Management and Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released. OMB statistical policy instructs policymaking officials to refrain from making public comment regarding the content of these reports within 30 minutes of their release. Therefore, we will not be taking questions from the public during this briefing. Both NASS and World Board staff are available for phone or email questions, and NASS will host a social media event at 1:30 Eastern Time this afternoon. We strive to have everything presented at this briefing match the official record. However, should there be any discrepancy, always refer to the official published estimates. With that, I'll turn things over to Anthony Perlman. He is the Associate Deputy Administrator for the Office of Analysis and Estimation at NASS. Anthony will be immediately followed by Dr. Mark Jekanowski, Chair of the World Ag Outlook Board. Anthony?
All right, well, thank you, Lance, and good afternoon. I want to welcome all those who are in the room today, as well as those who have joined online. I will be covering the August crop production report today, which includes the first survey-based yield and production forecast of the season for the nation's row crops, including corn, soybeans, and cotton, as well as an updated forecast for the small grain crops. And then we'll wrap up the briefing by looking at production forecasts for some of the nation's fruit crops. Now, as you may have noticed, we changed the cover of today's report to highlight the multiple data sources we use to establish the estimates and to remind data users that NASS reviews planted and harvested acreage in August for barley, corn, cotton, dry edible beans, oats, peanuts, rice, sorghum, soybeans, sugar beets, and wheat. Now, we incorporated the latest USDA administrative data, especially the FSA certified acreage, with our survey and satellite data and other sources of administrative data to determine if updates needed to be made to the previous acreage estimates for these crops. Now, we also used satellite imagery for yield estimation, primarily for corn and soybeans in the major producing areas of the U.S. Now, for winter wheat, we conducted our objective yield survey this month in the 10 program states to make field observations. And then lastly, we conducted our ag yield survey, which is an operator reported survey. In August, the sample size was approximately 14,500. Now, for this survey, we asked producers to report their expected yields as of August 1st. All right, on this slide, we are showing the percent of usable responses collected each day during the data collection window for that August ag yield survey and how 2026 compares with the previous 2 years. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the data, starting with corn. We'll first look at the current condition of this year's crop and how it compares to the previous 5 seasons. Now, the information presented on this slide comes from our weekly crop progress and condition survey, and each line on the graph represents the percent of the crop rated in good to excellent condition between 2021 and 2026, and then the red line represents the current year. As of August 2nd, which represents the closest date to the August 1 survey reference date, 61% of the corn acreage was rated in good to excellent condition, compared to 73% rated in these 2 categories at the same time last year. And as you can see, the percent rated in good to excellent condition has declined over the last 3 weeks. All right, this graphic shows the development of the corn crop by showing the percent of the acreage silking compared to the previous 5 years. Again, the data comes from our weekly crop progress and condition survey, and 2026 is again represented by that red line. Now, as of August 2nd, 90% of the acreage was silking compared to 86% at the same time last year. As you can see, development is in line with the previous 5 years. All right, let's now look at the corn numbers published in today's report. Now, based on our review of FSA certified acreage, we did make some changes. Planted acreage at 96.7 million was raised 1.5% or nearly 1.4 million acres from what was estimated in the June acreage report. However, acreage is down 2.1% from last year. Harvested area for grain is forecast at nearly 88.6 million acres. That is up 1.3% from the previous forecast, but 2.9% lower than last year. And then as of August 1st, the yield is forecast at 180.7 bushels per acre. That is down 3.1% or 5.8 bushels from the previous year. And then production is forecast at 16 billion bushels. That is down 5.9% from 2025. Now, as a reminder, August represents our first yield and production forecast of the season for corn. So that is why you do not see a calculated percent change from the previous estimate in this table for those 2 items. And then lastly, the bottom table shows the top 5 corn producing states in 2026 and how acreage, yield, and production compared to last season. All right, looking at the planted and harvested corn numbers graphically across the past 10 years, you can see that this year's planted total is down from last year, but still represents the 3rd highest planted area on record. And if realized, this will be the 2nd highest harvested acreage for grain since 1944. All right, looking at the average U.S. yield over the past 30 years with the trend line plotted, you can see how this year's forecasted yield of 180.7 compares to the previous years and trend. Even though yield is forecast to be down from last year, if realized, it would represent the 2nd highest U.S. corn yield on record. All right, this map is showing the current yield forecast by state and how it compares to the previous year. Now, the top number is the current yield forecast, and the bottom number is the percent change from 2025. States colored in blue are showing an increase from the previous year, whereas the states colored in red are showing a decrease. And then the darker the shade, the greater the percent change. Now, if you see a pound sign beside the top number, that represents a record high for that state, whereas an ampersand represents a record low. Now, looking across the country, you see declines in most areas of the Great Plains, Western Corn Belt, and Southeast compared with last year, whereas areas in the Eastern Corn Belt, Tennessee Valley, and Delta are expecting better yields. We'll point out that record high yields are forecast in Delaware, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Virginia. All right, this chart shows U.S. corn production over the last 10 seasons, so that you can see how this year's forecasted production of 16 billion bushels compares to the previous 9 years. Now, if realized, this will be the second highest production total on record, only behind last year. All right, let's now look at how today's NASS production forecast compares to pre-report industry expectations. Now, each blue dot on the chart represents an individual industry member's published expectations of corn production, and then that red square represents the NASS production forecast of 16 billion bushels. Now, as you can see, the NASS forecast does fall within the range, but is higher than many had anticipated. All right, next we'll look at soybeans, starting with the current condition of the crop. Again, we're looking at the percent of the acreage rated in good to excellent condition, again, with red line representing 2026. Now, as of August 2nd, 63% of the acreage was rated in good to excellent condition, compared to 69% at the same time last year. And as we saw with corn, the percent of the acreage rated in these two categories has declined over the last 3 weeks. This graphic shows how this year's crop is developing by showing the percent of acreage setting pods compared to the previous 5 years. As of August 2nd, 62% of the soybean acreage was setting pods, 7% ahead of the 5-year average pace. All right, looking at today's soybean numbers, planted acreage at nearly 86.8 million was raised 1.6% or 1.4 million acres from the June estimate and is up 6.8% from last season. Harvested acres are forecast at 85.8 million, also up 1.6% from the previous forecast and 6.6% above last year. Yield is forecast at 52.7 bushels per acre. That is down 0.6% or 0.3 of a bushel from the previous year. And then production is forecast at nearly 4.52 billion bushels. That is up 6% from 2025. All right, this chart shows how those 2026 planted and harvested acreage estimates compare with the previous 9 seasons. Now, here's how today's forecasted yield compares to previous seasons and trend. Now, like corn, if realized, this will be the second highest U.S. soybean yield on record. All right, looking at how the current yield forecast compares to the previous year by state. You see a lot of declines in the western part of the growing area and increases in most of the eastern states. Now, as of August 1st, record high soybean yields are forecast in Arkansas, Delaware, Illinois, Indiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, and Ohio. All right, this is how today's production forecast of 4.52 billion bushels compares to the previous 9 seasons. All right, looking at how today's soybean production forecast compares to industry expectations, it's also within the range, but higher than most had anticipated. All right, next we'll look at cotton. Again, we'll start by comparing the condition of this year's crop to the previous 5 seasons. As of August 2nd, 42% of the cotton acreage was rated in good to excellent condition, compared to 55% rated in these 2 categories at the same time last year. And as you can see, conditions have declined for cotton over the last 2 weeks. All right, looking at cotton development in terms of percent of the acreage setting bolls, you can see how this year's crop compares to the previous 5 years. As of August 2nd, development was in line with the previous years and was running just slightly behind the 5-year average pace in terms of setting bolls. All right, looking at today's cotton numbers, planted acreage at 10.5 million was raised 6.3% or 619,000 From the June estimate, it's also up 12.8% from last season. Harvested acres are forecast at 8.1 million. That's up 4.6% from last year. Now, as a reminder, August represents our first harvested acreage forecast of the season for cotton. Yield is forecast at 798 pounds per acre. That is down 6.3% or 54 pounds from the previous year. And then production is forecast at 13.6 million bales, down 2.1% from 2025. And then this is how the 2026 cotton acreage estimates compares to previous seasons. Now, looking at the average U.S. cotton yield over the past 30 years, you can see the 2026 forecast. It represents the fourth consecutive year of declining yields and is below trend. It also represents the lowest yield since 2015. All right, looking at how this year's forecasted yields compare to last year by state, you can see that most states are down from last year. However, if realized, the 2026 Arkansas yield would be a record high for that state. All right, in terms of production, now you can see how this year's production forecast of 13.6 million bales compares to previous seasons. All right, comparing today's cotton production forecast to industry expectations, you can see that it too is within the range, but higher than most had anticipated. All right, we'll now move on to the wheat crop, starting with winter wheat. This graphic shows how this year's harvest progress compares with the previous 5 seasons. As of August 2nd, 86% of the crop had been harvested. That's 1 percentage point ahead of last year and equal to the 5-year average pace. Now, we did make some minor changes to both planted and harvested area this month. Planted area at nearly 31.3 million acres was lowered 0.8% or 260,000 acres from the previous estimate, and is also down 5.7% from last season. Harvested acres are now forecasted just over 21 million acres, also down 0.8% or 170,000 acres from the previous forecast, and down 17.5% from last year. And then the yield forecast at 47 bushels per acre is up 0.6%. Or 0.3 of a bushel from last month's forecast, but down 14.4% or 7.9 bushels from the previous year. And then production is forecast at nearly 990 million bushels. That is down 0.1% from the July forecast and down 29.4% from last season. All right, looking at winter wheat acreage across time, you can see how this year's estimates compare to the previous 9 seasons. Now, I will point out harvested area at 21 million acres represents a record low for the U.S. And this is how today's yield forecast of 47 bushels per acre compares to previous years and trend. All right, looking at winter wheat yields by state. Now, for this one, we have 2 maps to show this month, since this is a follow-on forecast. This first map is comparing the August winter wheat yields to the July forecast. Looking across the country, you see fairly minor changes in most states. We'll point out that as of August 1st, record high yields are forecast in Illinois, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And then this map is showing the year-over-year winter wheat yield changes by state. All right, looking at production over the last 10 seasons, you can see how this year's forecasted production of 990 million bushels compares to the previous 9 seasons. If realized, this will be the lowest U.S. production since 1963. All right, the next 2 slides provide some information from our winter wheat objective yield survey that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. Now, this slide shows the percent of samples that have been processed in the lab so far this season, which means they were mature enough to be harvested and sent to our lab for analysis. And as the chart indicates, 97% of the samples have been processed by the lab so far this year, which is in line with the previous 5 seasons. Now, this chart is showing some additional data from our objective yield survey. The vertical blue bar represents the number of heads per square foot as measured by the survey. And then the red dot represents the yield forecast for the 10-state region that we conduct the objective yield survey in. And as you can see in the graphic, the August heads per square foot at 40.7 is up slightly from the July projection, but is below the previous 2 years and more in line with what we saw in 2022 and 2023. All right, breaking down winter wheat production by class, hard red at nearly 463 million bushels is down 1.7% from the July forecast and down 42.5% from last season. Now, if realized, this will be the lowest hard red production since 1957. Soft red at 287 million bushels is down 0.1% from last month and down 18.6% from last year. And then white winter at 240 million bushels is up 3.4% from last month, but down 1.7% from 2025. And then this is how today's winter wheat production forecast compares to industry expectations. All right, we'll now look at other spring wheat. Now, both planted and harvested acreage was raised 2.3% from the previous estimate, but both are down over 3% from last season. The yield forecast at 51.1 bushels per acre is down 2.3% or 1.2 bushels from last month's forecast, and down 1.2% or 0.6 of a bushel from the previous year. Production at 474 million bushels is down 0.1% from the July forecast, and down 4.5% from 2025. Now, looking at how this year's acreage numbers compared to the previous 9 seasons, you can see they are the lowest in this series and continue the overall decline we have seen going back to 2018. In fact, this is the lowest planted acreage in the U.S. since 1970. All right, looking at how today's forecasted yield compares to previous seasons and trend, you can see it is down for the second straight year, but is above trend. All right, looking at how the current yield forecast compares to last month by state, you'll see declines in the Dakotas and Minnesota due to dry and hot conditions in those states, whereas yields are up from last month in Idaho, Montana, and Washington. And then here we are looking at the year-over-year yield changes by state. And then this is how today's production forecast of 474 million bushels compares to the previous 9 seasons. All right, now today's production forecast falls within the range of industry expectations. All right, moving on to Durham. Both planted and harvested acreage was lowered nearly 3% or 50,000 acres from the previous estimate, and both are down from last season. The yield forecast at 38.4 bushels per acre is down 3.8% or 1.5 bushels from last month's forecast, and down 5.4% or 2.2 bushels from the previous year. Production is forecast at 66.4 million bushels. That is down 6.3% from the July forecast and down 23% from 2025. And then looking at Durham acreage across time, you can see how 2026 compares to the previous season. Now looking at today's yield forecast and how it compares to the previous years and trend, you can see it's down from last year and below trend. All right, comparing the current yield to last month's forecast by state, North Dakota is down again due to recent hot and dry conditions, but Montana is up from last month. Arizona and California are unchanged from July. And this map just shows again those year-over-year yield changes by state. And this is how the current production forecast for 2026 compares to previous years. All right, today's Durham production forecast looks to be somewhat of a surprise, falling below the range of industry expectations. All right, we do have quite a few other crops in today's report, and I'll move through these fairly quickly. Starting with barley, both planted and harvested area was lowered over 5% From the previous estimate, this represents a record low planted area for the U.S. and the second lowest harvested area. A yield at 78.8 bushels per acre is up 3.8% or 2.9 bushels from the July forecast, but down 1.5% from the previous season. Production is forecast at 140 million bushels. That is down 1.6% from last month and down 0.6% from 2025. Now looking at dry edible beans, both planted and harvested area was lowered less than 1% from the previous estimate, and both are down nearly 16% from last year. A yield at 2,079 pounds per acre is up 3.3% from 2025, while production is forecast to be down 13.1% compared with last year. Now looking at hay, no changes were made to the previous harvested acreage forecast for either alfalfa or other hay. Alfalfa yield is forecast at 3.25 tons per acre. That is down 5% from last year. Production is also forecast to be down 5% from the previous season. Now, if realized, this would be the lowest U.S. alfalfa hay production since 1952. Now, other hay yield at 1.87 tons per acre is down 10.5% from last year. Production is forecast to be down 9.9% from 2025. I do point out that the record low other hay production is forecast in both Illinois and Indiana. And then for hops, acres strung for harvest at 42,400 is up 1.9% from both the previous estimate and last season. Yield is forecast to be down 1.5% from last year, while production is forecast to be up 0.3%. All right, moving on to oats. Planted and harvested area was raised to 9.9 and 8.2% respectively. From the previous estimate, yield at 72 bushels per acre is down 0.1% from the previous forecast and down 2.4% from the previous season. However, if realized, this yield would represent the third highest yield on record for the U.S. Production is forecast at nearly 68.4 million bushels. That is up 8.1% from the July forecast, but down 1.8% from 2025. Now looking at peanuts, both planted and harvested area was lowered from our previous estimate, and both are down from the previous season. Yield at 3,956 pounds per acre is up 5% compared to the 2025 average yield. Production at 5.42 billion pounds is down 24.5% from last year, record high production. Total rice planted and harvested area were both raised 4.7% compared with the previous estimate, but both are down from last season. The yield at 7,644 pounds per acre is up 1.3% from 2025, while production is forecast to be down 23.4% compared with last season. Planted and harvested sorghum acreage were lowered from the previous estimate, and both are down from 2025. As of August 1st, yield is forecast at 55.4 bushels per acre. That is down 23.7% or 17.2 bushels from 2025, while production is forecast to be down 32.1% compared to last season. Sugar beet planted and harvested area was lowered from the previous estimate, and both are down from last year. A yield at 31.8 tons per acre is down 4.2% from 2025, while production is forecast to be down 8.7% from last year. All right, sugarcane harvested area is unchanged from our previous forecast, but up 1.1% from last season. Yield is forecast at 35.6 tons per acre. That is down 2.2% from 2025, while production is forecast to be down 1.3% compared with last season. I will point out that the record high sugar and seed production is expected in Louisiana this season. Tobacco harvested area was lowered to 0.1% from the previous forecast, but is up 0.3% from last year. Yield at 2,270 pounds per acre is up 8.5% from 2025, while production is forecast to be up 8.8% compared to last season. All right, I have to look at the fruit estimates that are in today's reports, starting with apples. Production is forecast at 10.4 billion pounds. That is down 6% from last season. Production in Washington, which is the largest apple producing state, is expected to be down 2% this year. Cranberry production is estimated to be up 4.8% compared with last year. Production in Wisconsin is up 4% and represents 61% of total U.S. production. U.S. grape production is estimated at 5.17 million tons. That is down 1.3% from 2025. Peach production is forecast to be down 14.7% from the previous season. Severe frost in several producing states and the loss of a processor in California all contributed to the drop in production. And then lastly, pear production in 2026 is expected to be down 14.8% from last year. All right, this slide just highlights a few of the upcoming reports through the rest of August and into September. On August 20th, we'll be releasing our rice stocks report. August 21st, cattle on feed, as well as our county estimates for cash rents. August 27th will be our annual citrus fruits report. August 31st, agricultural prices. We'll start September off as we normally do, releasing our CARES reports. And then we'll be back here on September 11th for the next crop production report, as well as a cotton ginnings report. Now, as mentioned earlier, Lance will be on X at 1:30 today for Stat Chat, fielding any questions about the numbers in today's report. So that concludes the August crop production report briefing. As a reminder, today's reports and all NASS reports and data can be found on our website. So with that, I will turn it over to Mark to talk about the WASDE.
All right, thank you, Anthony. I will walk you all through the WASDE for this month. I got a lot of information in here. I'll try to keep it as quick as I can, but we do have a lot to cover. Obviously, all of the data we got this morning from NASS, from the West production estimates go directly into the WASDE. Those are the official production forecasts for all of the crops in the WASDE. So we'll talk about how that impacts the U.S. balance sheets. And then we, as we always do, we're watching production around the world, weather implications for crops, Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere, and making changes as needed. So I will talk through those as we go through the presentation. Let's start with global wheat production. Down this month, 700,000 tons, led by a 1.8 million ton reduction in the European Union. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, the hot and dry conditions that the EU faced over this growing season. Canada, on the other hand, up 1 million tons, up on both area and yield. They had very good weather there. We're going to talk a little bit more about Canada too when it comes to a discussion of the canola crop. Ukraine, wheat production raised 1.4 million ton. That's based on higher area. And Kazakhstan raised 1 million tons, based mainly on favorable yields, favorable weather, strong yields, and that, of course, is the spring wheat crop there. So let's talk real quickly in a little bit more detail about wheat production in Europe. As you can see, this map illustrates where wheat is grown within Europe, and as you can see, it's grown virtually everywhere. And this is a winter wheat crop. Started out with relatively good conditions across most of the region. This is the cumulative precipitation in May. But then conditions started to deteriorate in June. You see a lot of dryness developing in the west, Spain, France, and then that continued through the balance of the summer. This is a percent of normal precipitation from July through early August. Dryness extended east throughout much of this region, and it also became very hot. The combination of dry conditions and extremely hot conditions during the important period of grain filling had implications for yield. And here I just note for some general context, focusing on France here, the average temperature in France relative to the past 30 years of history, way above typical years. And this shows up, these hot and dry conditions show up in our in satellite imagery of the vegetative health across the region. You can see very poor in France and extending east through Hungary, really across much of the region. So clearly this had implications for wheat as it was in its final stages of development, but other crops as well, including corn, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So now let's move into the global wheat balance sheet. Few things to talk about here. You'll note we raised our beginning stocks estimate for global wheat. That is mainly based on some back year revisions in the European Union, where we lowered food, seed, and industrial use, resulting in higher stocks there, which carried into higher beginning stocks for the current crop year. Production we talked about, feed use raised this month 1.6 million tons. That is mainly higher feed use in the EU, despite the smaller crop. The corn crop there also got hit very hard. So they're going to be feeding less corn, feeding more wheat. And they've always been a big wheat feeder in the EU anyway, but they'll be feeding even more given the poor corn crop there. Trade, global trade down this month. That is mainly lower exports from both Russia and Ukraine. And those lower exports in Russia and Ukraine mainly reflect the current conflict ongoing in the Sea of Azov and Black Sea region, leading to some logistical challenges there getting the grain out. The wheat crops in both Russia and Ukraine are relatively large this year, and that reduction in exports from those two countries is partially offset by higher exports from both Canada and Kazakhstan, given the given the larger crops we're forecasting there. Global ending stocks up 400,000 tons. That is also mainly higher stocks in Russia and Ukraine, exporting less. So more of that wheat is going to remain in the country. U.S. wheat balance sheet, pretty small changes this month based on the information that Anthony just presented a few minutes ago. A small reduction in U.S. wheat production overall, mainly dominated by reduction in hard red winter, given the drought, partially offset by higher production of white wheat. That lower production just comes straight out of ending stocks, reduces ending stocks, as you can see. Season average market price, we raised 20 cents per bushel, just based on recent prices, recent futures prices as well, but noteworthy that as you, I think, know, given that especially everything that's going on in the Black Sea region, wheat futures have been volatile lately. Moving into rice, global rice production, very small changes this month. With regard to rice production, that small reduction in foreign production there is Peru, and that is more than offset by an increase in the U.S., leading to a modest increase in global production. And similarly, the global rice balance sheet, very few noteworthy changes, various offsets, but no changes really affecting any of the major rice producing or exporting countries. So U.S. rice balance sheet, we'll start with the back year, 2025, 2026. We lowered our export forecast by 2 million hundredweight. That is both lower long grain and medium short, just based on a relative slowdown in the pace of exports recently. And with lower exports, no change in production, of course, that means higher ending stocks. So ending stocks were raised to 2 million hundredweight, which carries into the new crop year. So 26, 27 crop year. We're coming in with higher beginning stocks and higher production based on the information we got from NAS this morning. Higher area, more than offsetting lower yield, leading to that 5.1 million hundredweight increase in rice production. Combining the higher U.S. production with the higher beginning stocks, total supplies increased 7.1 million hundredweight. We didn't make any changes to our trade forecasts, either imports or exports. So those higher supplies are divided among higher domestic use and ending stocks. And we made no change to our season average price for either year this month. So now let's move into corn, global corn production. Again, starting with the back year, 25, 26. We raised our Brazil corn production forecast to 2 million tons. Now, given that that's a Southern Hemisphere crop, that is a crop that even though it shows up in the back year, it's currently being harvested. This is their second crop corn harvested after soybeans. They've had good conditions for the development of that crop, and this increase is based largely on IMEA and harvest results, showing that that crop is coming in strong. And again, harvest remains underway. Looking ahead for the new crop year, 2026-27, we'll talk about the United States in a minute. Other major producers, we reduced the EU corn production 3.6 million tons. Again, consistent with those weather slides I put up earlier, showing the dry and hot conditions impacting that crop as well. Russia and Ukraine both increased corn production forecasts, both increased this month. Ukraine mainly on higher area, Russia on higher yield. And Canada up slightly as well. So regarding Russia, I want to just give you a little bit more context on why we made that change or what's driving that change here. So Russia, these are the main areas within Russia where corn is produced, the Russian corn belt, if you will, concentrated in European Russia, the southern central district and southward. And basically what we saw this year was really remarkable precipitation, right, starting right at the beginning of the season. Very strong precipitation throughout the growing season, despite those that heavy amount of rainfall early in the season. The crop still did get in. It was a little bit delayed, but they were able to get it in. Essentially all of the acreage they expected, but those very favorable rainfall conditions are supportive of strong yields, and this was pretty consistent across nearly all of the major corn growing regions of Russia. And it was also relatively cool. So good rain, cool weather suggests strong corn production in Russia. And that 17.2 million ton crop would be record production for Russia. And that is up 9% from our forecast last month. So in terms of the global corn balance sheet, starting with the back year, 25-26, we talked about supply being up in the back year, driven mainly by higher production in Brazil. Feed use and total use is up as well. That is, again, mainly higher total use in Brazil. Brazil is producing more corn, and they're feeding more and also using more for ethanol. So those increases for both feed use and total use mainly reflect higher use in Brazil for both livestock and ethanol production. For the out year, 26, 27, again, we talked about supply already. Production up about 2 million tons. Total use up 2.6 million tons. Again, that's driven mainly by higher use in Brazil and the expansion of their ethanol program there. Feed use, corn feed use down. That is lower feed use in both the EU and China, and partially offset by higher feed use in Russia, given the large crop there. Global corn trade up this month. That is driven mainly by the U.S., higher exports from the U.S., which we'll talk about in a minute, and ending stocks down. That is primarily tighter stocks in the U.S., offset by higher stocks in Ukraine, partially offset by higher stocks in Ukraine. And again, for corn, global corn trade, we reduced both Ukraine's and Russia's exports this month, despite the higher production, given the logistics challenges of getting those crops out through the Black Sea. U.S. corn balance sheet, starting with the back year, we raised our exports, U.S. corn exports again this month to another new record, looking at a record pace there on the old crop. We expect that strength to carry into the new crop year as well. So that's why we raised our export forecast for the 26-27 crop to be consistent with where we've been on the old crop. And production change this month was relatively small based on the data we got from NASS. And with that small increase in production, lower beginning stocks, given the higher exports from the old crop year, and combined with higher exports for the new crop year, we tighten up ending stocks this month by a fair amount, 137 million bushels, dropping the stocks to use ratio to 10.1%. And with that, we raised our season average price for the new crop year by 10 cents per bushel, now forecast at $4.50 per bushel. That would be up 35 cents per bushel year over year. All right, moving into soybeans. Basically, global soybean production is up based mainly on higher U.S. production. Foreign production, you can see down there, that reflects lower production in Ukraine, lower area there. Ukraine not listed individually on the map, but that's what's driving that difference. So U.S. production, U.S. increased production more than offsets that to increase global production by about 600,000 tons. I'm going to briefly talk about canola production in Canada here. Obviously, an important competing oilseed with soybeans. Canada, a major rapeseed canola producer. This map just shows the main growing regions within Canada where canola is produced. And the bottom line here, I have it summarized. Conditions have been very good. Few signs of drought throughout the growing season. Good rainfall, especially early in the season, and generally cool weather. And that has resulted in good crop conditions, which we can see from the Vegetative Health Index. The red line there, of course, is 2026, and that you can see tracing those compared to previous years. We are at or above the high points of the VHI relative to the previous 5 years. So that's Saskatchewan, similar Alberta. So throughout all of the major growing regions, that's supporting higher production of both canola and wheat. Global balance sheet for soybeans. going through this, we talked about production up this month. Other factor I would note here, we raised global crush 600,000 tons. That is mainly an increase in the U.S. Higher crush in the U.S., reflecting strong global meal demand and also strong domestic meal demand in the U.S. For example, meal demand imports we raised for many countries, including this month, including Philippines, Mexico, Thailand, Turkey, the EU, and Ecuador. Not all of those are U.S. markets, but again, it illustrates the strength in global demand for soybean meal, and one of the factors behind the higher crush that we're seeing in the U.S. Global soybean trade, essentially no change this month, but some offsets. We expect higher exports out of Argentina, offsetting lower exports from Ukraine. So the U.S. balance sheet, again, starting with the back year, 2025, 2026, we raised crush for the back year. Again, strong domestic and export demand for soybean meal. And also, as you know, strong soybean oil demand in the U.S. for biofuels. So that tightens up ending stocks for the old crop year by 5 million bushels, which then translates into lower beginning stocks for the out year for the crop about to be harvested. Which combined with the increase in production we got from the NASS data this morning suggests total supplies of just under a total supply increase this month of about 39 million bushels. We raised crush again for the out year based on those strong demand conditions for both soybean meal and oil. And the result is just a small increase in ending stocks, much smaller than the increase in production we got this month. We didn't make any change to our season average price forecasts. Soybean prices at this point are being supported by strong demand as well as strong prices for corn as well. Cotton, global cotton production. We raised our forecast for Brazil's cotton production based on good weather. That crop is being harvested right now. And also Turkey. They've experienced good weather in that part of the globe as well. Partially offset is the small reduction in the U.S. that we'll talk about shortly. In terms of the global cotton balance sheet, beginning stocks tightened up this month by 900,000 bales. That mainly reflects higher exports from Brazil in previous years in the back year, which meant that their stocks were reduced, and also consistent with higher mill use in both China and India in the back year. Global cotton consumption this month for the new crop year, we raised 1 million bales, and that again is primarily China and India. China's consumption we raised by 500,000 bales and India's by 400,000 bales. Trade, so exports here up 500,000 bales. That is mainly higher exports out of Brazil. U.S. cotton balance sheet, small changes this month. Again, incorporating the data we got from NASS this morning, 90,000 bale reduction in U.S. production. And with no changes to use or exports, that comes right out of beginning stocks, comes right out of ending stocks, tightening up ending stocks by just about 100,000 bales. In terms of prices, for the 2025-2026 crop year, we lowered our season average market price forecast by 1 cent, now to 61.5 cents per pound. And for the upcoming crop year, for the new crop year, we raised our forecast by 2 cents per pound to 75 cents per pound. And that reflects recent price strength in futures markets, being driven by expectations for lower production, given the poor conditions in West Texas, and also some hope for possible increased demand by China. All right, let's move into sugar. And this will wrap up the crops before I get into livestock. So the U.S. sugar supply and demand balance sheet. Starting with the old crop year, 25-26, we raised our production forecast by 72,000 short tons. That is an increase in beet production, sugar production from beets, I should say. Reflecting processor reporting, beet slicing is still going on in some parts of the country, and that came in a little bit stronger than expected relative to last month. So that's that 72,000 short ton increase in production there. The other factor driving higher supplies for the back year is an increase in high tier imports, raised this month by 147,000 short tons. This time of the season, we are just reporting raw sugar imports and specialty refined sugar imports as they are arriving. So that 174,000 short ton increase essentially directly reflects sugar that has come in that was counted as it arrived. The result there, as you can see, is an increased ending stocks for the old crop year, which means a 219,000 short ton increase in beginning stocks for the new crop year. Relatively small changes in our production forecasts this month for both beet and cane sugar. But noteworthy, again, this is reflecting NASS data. Cane sugar production down this month, mainly reflecting lower yields in Florida, where they have some concern about mealy bugs there impacting the yields. Made a small adjustment to our high tier sugar forecast, just based on adjusting to the pace that we saw from the previous year, and no other noteworthy changes in the balance sheet, but resulting in an increase in ending stocks by 169,000 short tons and a stocks use ratio as of this month of 14.8%. Mexico sugar balance sheet, small changes this month. That 2025-2026 balance sheet, we're basically just truing up to data from FAS Post. That is essentially final. As you can see, based on those changes, Mexico is carrying in 64,000 metric tons more sugar stocks into the new crop year than we had forecast last month. And that increased beginning stocks will be exported by Mexico all to third countries, has no implications for exports to the U.S. since that export limit has already been set in last month's WASDE. All right, and now into livestock. So starting with beef, we reduced our beef production forecasts for both 2026 and 2027. Here, of course, we're shifting into calendar years. So our 2026 a reduction of 320 million pounds primarily reflects incorporating data from the July cattle report, implying lower placements, and also just observed steer and heifer slaughter reductions for 2026, which we expect are going to carry through into 2027. Pork production on lowered this month, 80 million pounds. That is based on recent data, just reflecting both the reduced slaughter and lighter weights. No change to our forecast for 2027. Broilers and turkey, again, there for both of those relatively small changes, just incorporating recent slaughter and hatchery data. For broilers, we see an increase, especially for the third quarter, reflecting the higher slaughter pace there. And for turkeys, we're seeing both a higher pace of slaughter and higher weights as well, driving that production increase. Prices for steers, we pulled back this month, both 2026 and 2027, based just on recent price trends, recent price data. Noteworthy that with packer margins deeply in the red, they've been offering less for cattle. That's putting some pressure on cattle prices, and we have seen about a 10% decrease in boxed beef prices over the past month. So that's for 2026, and we expect some of that to carry through into 2027. Hog price, on the other hand, we raised 50 cents per hundredweight. Again, just based mainly on recent prices and slightly lower production that we're currently forecasting. And broilers and turkeys, some offsets there, a little reduced our price forecast for broilers by 2.3 cents, reflecting higher production. And for turkey, we're observing some price strength there. And so that is behind that 5 cent per pound increase in our turkey price. U.S. meat trade, small changes this month, mostly just truing up to recent data. The only thing I'd probably note is the reduction in our pork export forecast, and that reflects what we've been seeing as some recent weakness in our pork exports, especially to Western Hemisphere markets. Beef imports, on the other hand, raised this month for both 26 and 2027, reflecting strong exportable supplies in Oceania. Competitive prices there, still high prices in the U.S., so that's pulling in some of those imports. And dairy. Dairy production, milk production this month for 2026, essentially no change. Cow inventory up slightly for 2026, offset by a slight reduction in milk per cow. For 2027, we didn't make any change in the size of the dairy herd, but we anticipate that reduction in milk per cow to carry through into 2027, pulling production down slightly from where we had it for next year. Product trade, fat basis and skim solids basis exports and imports. Fat basis imports we raised this month for 2026. That mainly reflects growing imports, higher imports of butter, especially specialty butter, driving that. Our export forecast on a fat basis we also raised, and that also reflects higher U.S. exports of butter and cheese. And we expect that to carry through into next year. Skim solids basis trade, exports down half a billion pounds this month. That mainly reflects lower exports of non-fat dry milk and lactose, given strong U.S. prices and strong demand in the U.S. for protein. And dairy product prices. No change to our cheese price forecasts this month. Butter, we pulled back for 2026 based on recent observed prices, which we expect some of that pressure to carry into 2027. Non-fat dry milk prices down a penny this month. Noteworthy, still very strong prices for non-fat dry milk. And dry whey prices as well remain persistently elevated. Class prices, class 3 price raised 10 cents per pound for 2026 this month. That reflects that stronger whey price. Class 4 prices are down based on lower butter prices. And the all milk price for 2026, we lowered 15 cents per pound. And for 2027, 5 cents per pound. And that covers all of the high points of the WASDE. So thank you all for your attention, and hope you learned something from this, a little bit about the logic behind how we come up with the numbers. And for those of you online, thank you for attending as well. We will see you back here